administration. While the incumbent spends the day golfing and not conceding defeat. And back home, Victoria's regions to reunite with Melbourne as the state's ring of steel comes down. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Gemma Vaness. After a bitterly fought campaign and days of uncertainty, Joe Biden is tonight President-elect of the United States. The race has finally been called after the Democrat clinched the battleground of Pennsylvania. He delivered his acceptance speech from his home state of Delaware, telling the world it's time for America to heal, and pledged to restore the soul of his nation's democracy.
I pledge to be a president who seeks not to divide, but unify, who doesn't see red states and blue states, only sees the United States.
His running mate Kamala Harris has made history too. She becomes the first woman of colour and first South Asian to be elected to the office of Vice President. Despite no formal concession from Donald Trump, our Prime Minister has joined other world leaders in congratulating Joe Biden on his election victory. Our correspondents are in some of the key battlegrounds tonight, but we start with Michael Rowland in Washington, DC.
Good evening. Joe Biden has been declared the winner, but with the incumbent digging in, there is tremendous uncertainty about just what happens next. When the race was called, celebrations erupted across the country. There were tears of joy, dancing in the streets and fireworks over the big cities. US Bureau Chief David Lipson joins me now. David, good evening. A US election like no other. The President-elect faces no shortage of challenges.
Absolutely right, Michael. This was an election campaign that won't be forgotten anytime soon, an election count for the ages indeed. Joe Biden, of course, declared President-elect, but he inherits a nation at war with itself, losing the battle against the coronavirus and also trying to recover from the worst economic shock since the Great Depression. There's also a large portion of Americans who truly believe that this election has been stolen before their eyes, and they will be more disenfranchised than they were when they turned to Donald Trump in 2016. So Joe Biden, no surprise that he's talking about healing and cooperation. Actually achieving it will be a different matter because he does have, it seems, a hostile Senate to deal with. Getting through his cabinet alone may prove a challenge, let alone his election agenda.
David, thank you. We'll come back to you a bit later on. As we heard earlier, Pennsylvania proved to be the crucial state getting Joe Biden to that magic target of 270 Electoral College votes. The President-elect delivered his acceptance speech to the honking of car horns. North America correspondent Catherine Diss was there.
And it is now my great honor to introduce the President-elect of the United States of America, Joe Biden.
After days of inching ahead, a final dash across the finish line and onto the helm of American democracy.
Tonight, we're seeing all over this nation, all cities and all parts of the country, indeed across the world, an outpouring of joy, of hope, renewed faith in tomorrow. Bring a better day. And I'm humbled by the trust and confidence you've placed in me.
As people filled the city's streets from east coast to west, Joe Biden's victory was met with a flood of emotion.
It's over! This is one of the happiest days of my life.
A moment that also meant the end of the Trump era.
It's easier to tell your kids character matters. It matters. Telling the truth matters. Being a good person matters.
We did it. We did it, Joe. You're going to be the next president of the United States.
And the election of Kamala Harris as vice president, a pioneering achievement.
While I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last. Because every little girl watching tonight sees that this is a country of possibilities.
This country owes women of color an crazy amount of gratitude for this moment. sense of relief. They know who will be their next leader.
But a bitterly contested election has exposed deep divisions.
For all those of you who voted for President Trump, I understand the disappointment tonight. I've lost a couple times myself, but now let's give each other a chance.
Biden's going to change the world, the country, and you know what? This guy, he's already lost.
Even as people celebrated across the country, coronavirus infections in the US are hitting global daily highs.
On Monday, I will name a group of leading scientists and experts to help take the Biden-Harris COVID plan and convert it into an action blueprint that will start on January the 20th.
Joe Biden's victory came on the very day he was elected to the Senate 48 years ago.
The energy here in Joe Biden's home state is electric. The sea of support as far as the eye can see. They've come out to witness their man's climb to the top, a political ascent almost 5 decades in the making.
It's clear for many, a Joe Biden presidency promises a new day for America.
Let us be the nation that we know we can be.
And with a look at how Joe Biden got across the line, here's election analyst Casey Briggs.
It took nearly 4 days, but in the end, President-elect Joe Biden can claim a comfortable victory. It's not the 2008 Obama-style landslide some Democrats were daring to hope for, but despite it feeling like a nail-biter, the result isn't that close. The delay in the result is just because of the huge increase in postal votes, rules for counting them in states like Pennsylvania, and the huge partisan divide in the methods people were voting by. Joe Biden's cleared 270 Electoral College votes. He has a viable path to 306, and the latter is the same number Donald Trump won 4 years ago. The difference is that Biden has won the popular vote by 4 million votes and counting. And he's won key Rust Belt states by bigger margins than Donald Trump achieved. Pennsylvania pushed him over the threshold, handing him the keys to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue from January next year. That race was called near simultaneously by US networks after the margin exceeded 0.5 percentage point. That's the threshold for a recount in the state. As well as Pennsylvania, he's flipped Michigan and Wisconsin, as well as Arizona, although the margin there is still tightening on further counting. There's more counting as well to come in North Carolina and Alaska. They're awaiting more postal votes, but Donald Trump has the edge in those states. And Georgia is still set for a recount, but Joe Biden pulled a little bit further ahead today in further counting. And while the Democrats have the White House, they've had a more mediocre result in other races, including in the Senate. The balance of power there won't be settled until 2 runoff elections in Georgia in January. If the Democrats don't win, the incoming president may find his agenda, his cabinet picks and his Supreme Court nominations being blocked.
Despite Joe Biden's victory speech and the numbers confirming the outcome, Donald Trump is still refusing to accept defeat. The US president has again claimed he'd won the election before the US news networks called the results. Chief Correspondent Phil Williams reports.
Donald Trump was doing what he loves when news broke the presidential race was swinging in a different direction.
Thank you, Mr. President!
Now the loser, but not showing it, Mr. Trump posed for pictures with a bride-to-be.
Have a great life, right? Yeah. Young and beautiful you.
Refusing to accept defeat, he retreated to the clubhouse to issue a statement. This election is far from over. Beginning Monday, our campaign will start prosecuting our case in court.
Well, the networks thought Biden was going to win by 10%. Gee, what happened? Come on, don't be ridiculous. Networks don't get to decide elections. Courts do.
The Trump campaign has launched nearly a dozen lawsuits in key battleground states. So far, 7 have been rejected. 3 have been taken to the Supreme Court. And Mr. Trump is seeking recounts in Georgia, Nevada, Arizona and Wisconsin. Trump supporters took to the streets and state capitol buildings across the country to vent their fury.
Biden has not won the election. All of the legal ballots have not been counted. There's been multiple cases of voter fraud happening.
One by one, they echoed unsubstantiated claims the election had been stolen by the Democrats.
We saw a coup being attempted in America.
While Mr. Biden won the popular vote, Donald Trump is focusing on his own historic moment, receiving the most ballots for a sitting president, more than 70 million.
If you let this down and don't fight, we're going to lose our freedom of this country.
In Washington, Biden supporters are getting ready to help the president out of the White House. The road ahead is narrowing for Mr. Trump as some Republicans keep their distance and others urge him to accept defeat. Barring a miracle, the reality star turned president may soon have to accept a message from the American people. He has just 73 days left in office.
In other news, Victoria's long road out of COVID restrictions has turned another corner. From tomorrow, there will be no limits on where Victorians can travel within their state. And if case numbers remain low, we can expect a further relaxing of the rules in a fortnight. There's now just 4 active cases in Victoria, and for the first time since March, none are healthcare workers. Richard Willingham reports.
Victoria's beaches have never looked more inviting for Melburnians. And tomorrow, the wait will be over for a surf or a swim. Tourism operators have already been swamped.
In terms of the rental holiday market, we'll also get quite a lot of inquiries for that as well. So it's going to be a very busy time.
Did you hear the news about the Ring of Steel coming up?
Geelong resident Melissa Bevan hasn't seen her mum in Melbourne for 7 months.
Be really good to see you, Mum.
That visit will be easier with Victoria's social restrictions also loosened, with 2 adults able to visit a home every day. Now they can be from different houses. In a fortnight, up to 10 people will be allowed to visit and 50 people can gather in public.
9 days of zero is not the same as a vaccine. If we want to enjoy these steps and more, then we all have to play our part. And it is getting tested when you feel sick. It is taking these rules seriously. They're not rules that are against you, they are rules for you.
Hospitality, which has suffered under the lockdown, will be able to serve more beers to more people from tomorrow, with up to 40 patrons inside and 70 outside. Some poker machines and the casino can slowly resume too, as well as limited live music. In 2 weeks, cafes, restaurants and pubs can have up to 100 people indoors and 200 outside, subject to density limits.
They take a step today, they take an even bigger step in a couple of weeks' time. And that's very important for jobs, very important for those businesses, but it has to be done in a safe way.
Cinemas, galleries and museums can also open their doors with up to 20 patrons per space. In a fortnight, capacity will grow to 100 people, subject to density rules. Similar rules apply to libraries and play centres. Gyms have felt the weight of the crisis. They can start pumping tomorrow with up to 20 people per venue. They must have a COVID-safe monitor. Capacity will grow to up to 100 people in a fortnight.
For people's mental health and physical well-being, it is definitely an essential service.
Capacity at indoor pools will also increase later in the month, and some indoor sports can resume. From tomorrow, worshippers can gather outside in groups of 50, with 20 allowed indoors, including for funerals, but not weddings. From November 22, worshippers can congregate with 100 people inside and up to 500 people outdoors. Weddings and funerals will be allowed to have 100 people, 10 people if it's in a private residence.
Look, I think Victorians are happy to cop that we need public health rules to make sure we don't get another outbreak, but they just want those rules to be based on common sense. And there's not a lot of common sense in some of the rules the Premier announced today.
After a devastating year, Victoria is slowly moving towards something that looks a little normal, but there's still a lot of work to be done. The Premier and his team are trying to work out how to reopen hotel quarantine, a program whose failure caused this crippling crisis. As for these, they're set to be around for a while longer. Richard Willingham, ABC News, Melbourne.
An Australian company is poised to begin production of millions of doses of a new COVID-19 vaccine. It's a gamble, as the drug is still in clinical trials and yet to be approved. Manufacturers say it's worth the risk, given the urgency of the pandemic.
From tomorrow, this production line will swing into action. It will begin the long process of producing millions of doses of the Oxford University COVID-19 vaccine.
We've seen that the vaccines can induce the immune response that we would hope to see. Then we have to test in large numbers of people to see if that immune response prevents them from being infected.
The results of the clinical trials won't be known until the end of the year. But with support from the federal government, this Australian biotechnology company is jumping the gun.
We make it ahead of time so that should the clinical trial be positive with the outcome that we're looking for, it will be available and the vaccine will be available in the short term to distribute to the population.
Bioethicist Professor Angus Dawson says it's not the way things are usually done.
Very unusual to do that, but this is an unusual set of circumstances.
He says it's a high-risk strategy. If it fails, it could cost billions. But if it succeeds, it could save hundreds of thousands of lives.
A vaccine would take at least 6 months to produce, and by actually manufacturing and then stockpiling those vaccines now, we can get ahead.
But even if the vaccine gets approval, it's unlikely to mean the end of the pandemic.
COVID-19 vaccines will be approved if they're 50% effective at preventing the COVID-19 disease, not necessarily the infection. So the first round of vaccines may be not as effective as the community expects.
Round 2 may be better, but that's still some way off. Ursula Malone, ABC News.
Another 171 Australians who were stranded overseas are back on home soil after the latest government-backed repatriation flight touched down in Darwin this afternoon. The new arrivals will join 183 repatriated Australians already in the Howard Springs quarantine facility.
Just after 1 o'clock this afternoon local time, touchdown for the latest group of Australians who've been stuck overseas for months. Qantas flight QF110 arrived at the Darwin RAAF base carrying 171 Australians. It's the third repatriation flight to arrive in the NT under a new government program, bringing home Australians caught out by coronavirus travel restrictions. After the arrivals were screened, health samples were collected and taken to Royal Darwin Hospital for testing. And now, the repatriated Australians will begin their 2-week stay in the Howard Springs quarantine facility. There are currently 6 active coronavirus cases in the facility, all of them from a repatriation flight from India, which arrived almost 2 weeks ago. Health authorities say coronavirus cases are safely managed, and they expect as many as 10% of all arrivals could test positive. The next repatriation flight will come from India and is expected to arrive on Tuesday. Nicholas Hines, ABC News.
Ordering food using online delivery platforms is becoming increasingly popular in Australia, but a recent spate of deaths has put a spotlight on the dangerous work undertaken by food delivery riders. The widow of one rider has travelled from China to Sydney to fight for compensation after her husband was killed at work. Local Communities reporter Lydia Feng has the story.
A single photo, a treasured memory of a life taken too soon.
Xiaojun was a very caring person and was always helping people. He always had a smile on his face and he was an optimistic and warm person.
Xiaojun Chen worked as a rider for the food delivery platform Hungry Panda to support his family in rural China. He was killed on the job when his motorcycle collided with a bus in Zetland in September. His widow and brother-in-law have travelled from Shanxi province to Sydney to collect his ashes.
I urge everyone to show more respect and care to food delivery riders because behind every rider there's a loving family and they're carrying their family's hopes.
While the company has paid for Mrs. Wei's travel costs, it has not offered to compensate her for her husband's death. Many food delivery platforms classify their riders as independent contractors, not employees, meaning they're not obligated to pay workers' compensation.
These workers are dying on our roads. Their families are being left destitute, all because of a legal label.
A New South Wales parliamentary inquiry into the gig economy is due to begin tomorrow. It will examine whether new laws should be introduced to better protect workers like Mr Chen.
If a person dies at work, their family should be looked after, regardless of whether or not they work in the gig economy or in the mainstream economy.
Mrs Wei will share her heartbreaking experience at the inquiry.
I don't want another story like Jia Jun's in this world, or another family to experience this tragedy like our family.
A brave voice calling for change. Lydia Feng, ABC News, Sydney.
More Indigenous families than ever before are making the tough choice to send their kids off-country to get a high school education. One of the great achievements being celebrated this NAIDOC week is the huge rise in Indigenous Year 12 graduates. But educators say it comes at a huge cost. Indigenous Affairs correspondent Isabella Higgins has the story.
Being a teenager is hard enough, but these girls are growing up hundreds of kilometres away from their community and culture.
I miss being around my mob, like my cousins, my aunties, uncles, because family is important as well in my life.
16-year-old Riley is from a small town in northwest New South Wales, but this year made the tough choice to move to Sydney.
I miss mum and dad. Phone calls aren't enough.
She's boarding at the Byalla Girls Hostel and attending the local public school, hoping that will help her get into university.
My mum doesn't want us to make mistakes in education, and she wants us to have a good life and not a life of struggle.
Where I come from, you don't get a better education as you would if you came to the city.
The boarding house tries to celebrate the girls' heritage and connect them to local elders. Many made the choice to leave with the hope they could one day give back to their people.
I've only come here so then when I go back home I could be a school teacher up there. It's just a sense in me that I need to help other people, so becoming a nurse would definitely fulfil that, yeah.
I just want to be that person to make a change in Aboriginal communities.
Indigenous families in regional or remote areas where there are few, if any, secondary school options are instead turning to boarding school. Figures suggest there's been a 50% increase in the number of Indigenous boarders just in the last 5 years.
But research shows the transition to boarding for Indigenous kids is tough, and sometimes there's a high dropout rate.
We've recently done a study with a community in the Northern Territory. Young people were very, very isolated when they went away to school, and most of them actually dropped out within the first year.
These girls are sure they made the right choice and are rising to the challenge. Isabella Higgins, ABC News.
The Reserve Bank of Australia cut official interest rates to record lows this week. Here's Alan Kohler with what that means for our savings.
In all the excitement and tension of the American election, you can be forgiven for forgetting what happened last Tuesday. The RBA cut interest rates to 0.1%, remember, and said that they wouldn't be increased for at least 3 years to get inflation up and unemployment down. So now if you put $1,000 into an ordinary bank account with one of the big four banks, they'll pay you 50 cents in interest for a year, the price of one banana. 10 years ago, someone who retired having saved $500,000 through hard work could expect to make the equivalent of the age pension, about $25,000 a year, from a safe bank term deposit. Now the bank interest rates are near enough to zero, so the days of making a living from savings without taking a risk are gone. To live on savings of any sort, you have to risk your money in shares or non-bank deposits. By the way, the actual overnight cash rate in the market fell in June, well before the RBA officially cut the cash rate target, because the RBA itself was flooding the banking system with cash in order to force the cash rate down. So why was it pretending to hold the official rate at 0.25% while actually forcing it down in the market? Good question. Anyway, the major banks didn't pass on that rate cut to their variable home loan customers, and they aren't passing it on now because they can't. Their costs are too high, and they're being undercut by digital banks with no branches and very few staff. For all of them, minuscule interest rates mean minuscule profit margins and falling share prices for the millions of Australians who own them. The price of using interest rates to fix the economy has become very high indeed.
On the satellite, cool onshore winds are bringing a few coastal showers to the eastern of Queensland and northeast New South Wales, while a high is keeping elsewhere dry. Troughs are causing thunderstorms to develop over western South Australia, the Kimberley, the top end and inland Queensland. Some of the storms in Queensland are severe. Looking around the country for tomorrow, Queensland mostly sunny and cool to mild in the east, very warm in the northwest with storms in the southwest. A clearing shower and cool to cold in northeast New South Wales, mostly sunny and cool to mild in the southeast. Sunny and very warm in the southwest with late storms in the northwest. Victoria, mostly sunny and cool to mild in the southeast, warm to very warm elsewhere. Mostly sunny in Tasmania, very warm in the south and cool to mild in the north. Mostly sunny in South Australia, warm to very warm in the southeast and central parts, hot in the west and in the north. Western Australia, windy with showers and cool to cold in the southwest, a late shower and warm in the south. Windy and warm in the northwest and mostly sunny and hot in the northeast. Mostly sunny in the Northern Territory, very warm in the north, hot over the interior and very warm to hot in the south. And looking ahead to Tuesday's forecast for the capital cities, partly cloudy for Brisbane, mostly sunny for Sydney and Canberra, partly cloudy for Melbourne, mostly sunny in Hobart. Adelaide, showers developing with a possible storm, showers and a possible early storm in Perth, and showers with the chance of a storm in Darwin. And that is the latest from ABC News. Remember, you can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on iView. I'm Gemma Vanessa, and stay with us for Australia Remembers, the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II.
What if I was to say that the first ever team to represent Australia were all but one Aboriginal?
In 1868, a group of Aboriginal cricketers sailed to England to play at cricket's hallowed grounds.
They were heroes over there.
Now, today's Indigenous team retrace their steps to play homage.
It's the story that should be told.
To those legendary ancestors.
To those who came before.
Walkabout Wickets, Tuesday, 8:30 on ABC and iView. Whenever you want, wherever you are, know the story with ABC News, the most trusted news source. Get breaking news updates with live notifications, plus the latest news from Australia and around the world.
If the situation deteriorates, the hard border comes back.
Go to news.abc.net.au or download the News app.
I haven't seen anything like this in my lifetime.
It wasn't a fire, it was a storm. It was a firestorm.
Scenes which have been described as apocalyptic and unprecedented.
So listen up, Australia, because it's time to talk about the weather.
Barrier Dated Truth, it's part of Broken Hill's heritage.
And there's no money coming in to get the paper out.
A newspaper in trouble.
We all had a feeling it might have been coming, kind of hoping for a miracle.
And an unlikely champion.
He knew what the paper meant to people, and we got it going. It's like the birth of another child.
Australian Story, tomorrow ABC and iView.
This week on News Breakfast, the highly anticipated new season of The Crown is about to drop. We'll speak to 3 of its stars.
And she's the real-life mother behind the story of Lion that became an Oscar-nominated movie. We'll meet Sue and Saru Briley. Don't miss it.
Economic growth family had never lost a live performance.
Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are advised that